So this particular lesson follows on directly from another lesson, which is the third line of immunity, focusing on the humoral response. Now the distinction here is we're now going to focus on the action of T cells. We're going to be looking at the cell-mediated response. So to recap, the cell-mediated response is very, very similar to the humoral response in a lot of ways. And this largely comes from our first few steps. So with the cell-mediated response, we have the same opening stage where an antigen-presenting cell makes its way to the lymph tissue. Now, a point of difference, which I'll highlight in green here, is following this, in the lymph tissue, we're no longer looking at B cells, we're now looking at the different types of T cells that can be produced and how each are capable of recognizing a specific antigen. Now, when this antigen-presenting cell activates a specific T cell containing the complementary receptor, it's going to go through the same kind of stages as that we looked at in the previous lesson with humoral immunity. So it becomes sensitized, it enlarges, it divides, it goes through that process of proliferation. So the key distinction here with the cell-mediated response so far is that we're looking at the action of T cells and not B cells. So if we have a quick look at this diagram over on the right-hand side, you'll see our antigen-presenting cell arrives in the lymph tissue. Now, one particular type of T cell is going to proliferate, so sensitize, enlarge, and divide, and we're going to get that forming into a few different types of T cells. So this diagram simplifies things somewhat. It's only looking at T cells merging and becoming killer T cells or helper T cells, and finally memory cells, but we're going to look at an extra type there as well. So following on, here are all of our types of T cells that we need to know. So number one, cytotoxic or killer T cells. Now killer T cells, their job is to effectively destroy, hence their name killer, any cells, and they do this using chemicals known as perforins. Secondly, memory T cells. Memory T cells, like memory B cells, are long-lasting T cells which allow for a more rapid secondary response if you were to encounter the same pathogen again. Third, suppressor T cells. Now, when your immune response itself, so this is your body's own response to a foreign body, become excessive, or when the infection that you've been battling has been dealt with, has been destroyed, what suppressor T cells do is inhibit both T and B cell activity. And finally, we also have helper T cells, which we alluded to in the last lesson. We're going to look at them in a little bit more detail now. So, helper T cells. They do three key jobs, okay? And the way that they do their jobs comes from, firstly, their secretion of chemicals known as cytokines. Now, what cytokines do is, firstly, attract more B and T cells to a particular area. Secondly, attract more macrophages to an area. And finally, this is what we spoke about in the previous lesson with the humoral response, they can activate or help to activate some B cells. So when we're looking at cellular immunity overall, this is a very quick summary of everything that's taking place. So number one, the pathogen is ingested by a macrophage, and we have this pathogen being digested and fragments of it appearing on the surface of that particular macrophage. So this becoming, in essence, an antigen-presenting cell. Now, from here, we can have our third option here in some cases, where helper T cells will secrete cytokines, and that might lead to cytokines activating a B cell pathway. Or what we're going to focus on in this lesson is cytokines then stimulating helper T cells and helper T cells to divide. So the helper T cell is then going to divide, and it's going to divide into other types of T cells perhaps. And we also have killer T cells which can proliferate from here, and they're going to hunt and destroy these particular pathogens found elsewhere within the body. So to break it down and to compare these two responses to one another, I'm going to highlight the B cells in yellow and the T cells in green. So to compare these responses, B cells, as a reminder, is our humoral or our antibody-mediated response, and T cells are more to do with the cell-mediated response. So with B cells, we only have two main types. We have plasma B cells and we have memory B cells. With the T cells, we do have memory cytotoxic, suppressor and helper T cells. In terms of their activation, it is largely the same. So an antigen-presenting cell, I'm sorry, I've got this wrong in this diagram here. Let me adjust. So antigen-presenting cell, traveling to the lymph tissue. And what they're going to activate is slightly different. So I'll highlight the differences here. Instead of activating the same type of cell, they're activating their relevant cell. Okay? And that's going to happen in the same way with a complementary receptor to that specific antigen. Now, these B cells, in the case of antibody-mediated immunity, become sensitized, enlarged, and divide. So maybe I'll highlight some of the similarities here in blue, so they're both doing the same thing. And in the case of B cells, they might also come directly into contact with the antigen itself as part of this process. As we move on down to the method of destroying the antigen, as we've mentioned in the previous lesson, antibodies, in the case of antibody-mediated immunity, are produced by plasma B cells. They travel through the blood and they combine with that complementary antigen to produce a antigen-antibody complex. So there were quite a few different options as to what this will mean for that particular antigen, but effectively I've summarized here. So it's either going to neutralize the antigen, it's going to result in cell lysis, or it's going to enhance that process of phagocytosis. There was more detail there with cell lysis and enhancement of phagocytosis in the previous lesson. In the case of T cells, well, how do they destroy it? Well, it's only one type of T cell that's really going to go and destroy other cells, and that is the cytotoxic T cell. And the cytotoxic T cell is going to release perforins, which are going to destroy that infected cell. Now, the final little part that we want to mention, and this was mentioned right at the start of the previous lesson, is that in the case of the antibody-mediated response, we're looking at extracellular antigens and cells. And finally, with the cell-mediated response, we're looking at intracellular pathogens, or we're looking at transplanted tissue and other things like cancer cells.